So now the next speaker is Moshe Vardi, and you already know that he's member of EurASc, and he got the Pascal, the Blaise Pascal medal in 2008. So he's also the director of the Kennedy Institute of Information Technology in the United States, and he's also going to talk today about humans, machines, and work. This is a real trending topic, and how artificial intelligence is impacting in all these areas.
Yeah. Good afternoon. So we all hear about AI and how we must do it, and there is a race. If you don't do it, you're left behind. But I want to stop and talk a little bit about the human dimension of it, that I think very often in the enthusiasm of technology, we forget. So let's take one example of AI technology that was mentioned before, which is a driverless car, or AVs, autonomous vehicle. This is a very hot area. Hundreds of companies are kind of driving this, between the technology companies, the car companies, hundreds of startups. The market is estimated in trillions of dollars over the next decade. People will give you different estimates when it's going to happen. Some people say just about to roll, 5 years. Other people say no, 25 years. I'm a bit more of a pessimist, but we don't know exactly how it's going to work out. There are many legal issues will have to be resolved in many United States, in many states. By law, a moving vehicle has to have a driver. So the laws will have to change to adapt. This is clearly will have a profound business disruption, because we will need fewer cars. Cars now are very inefficient. My car, typically I drive my car for about half an hour a day, and then 23 and a half hours it does nothing. So this is very inefficient use of vehicles, that if you take away that they need to own the car, it will be much more efficient. Huge impact, for example, if you need a liver, how are you going to get a liver? If you have a liver disease, you need to get liver. You're really waiting for someone to be killed in a car crash so you can get the liver. What happens if suddenly people don't get killed in car crashes? Because some estimates we can reduce mortality again by 90%. Now, clearly this will have a huge societal benefit, reduce accidents, make transportation much easier for many people today who are mobility challenged. But here is a chart from about 5 years ago, but the data says that it hasn't changed much. And it shows the most common job in every state in the United States. Now this you have to be careful. It has to do with the aggregation of different job categories. So this is somewhat artificial, but it does show you that the drivers is a very, very common job in the United States. The estimates is there are millions of drivers. And so we expect massive impact on drivers if we automate vehicles. So today the question, what will technology and what will automation do to the workforce, is a hot topic, and almost every month a new study is published by academia, by some consulting company, OECD. And last year, MIT Technology Review decided to try to put them all together and get some what they call consensus on the prediction of what will happen. And as you can see here, there's no way to get consensus, because the predictions are all over the place. And Technology Review concluded there are about as many opinions as there are experts. So I'm not going to make any predictions. Instead, let's not make predictions. Let's look at the past. And I'm going to look at US manufacturing as a test case, as an example, as a case study, for two reasons. One, the US is a huge part of the world economy. It's about 20–25% of the whole world GDP is just United States. And manufacturing in the United States, unlike what you may have heard, is a huge industrial sector. In fact, it's the largest in the world after China. China is today #1, US is #2. Manufacturing is the biggest economic sector in the United States, almost twice as big as government, which is the next one. Here is a chart. When I saw it first, I said, wow. So we hear all the time how the US is being killed in manufacturing because of China and Mexico. But in reality, if you look at the red line here, which is volume in constant dollars, essentially it's been growing up and growing up for the past 50 years, of course, with the normal zigzags of the economic cycles. And so we are now probably close to $2.5 trillion in net added value. The blue line is employment. As you can see, it peaked in 1980. and it's been going down essentially steadily again, subject to economic fluctuation since then. We have lost about 7 to 8 million jobs, and we are now just around 12 million jobs in manufacturing. We used to be 20 million jobs. Now, what's driving this job loss? The answer is very simple. Do we have economists in the audience here? Okay, no economists, so I can say whatever I say. Good. Easier. Productivity, if you look at productivity between, for example, over a period of 15 years, you see the productivity has doubled. And if productivity doubles, you need fewer people to make more stuff. It's very simple. If you want to see what today a normal, a modern car manufacturing plant looks like, go later and Google Tesla Model S factory, and you'll see a fully automated factory. There are no people inside. In fact, the lights are turned on so you can take pictures because the robots don't even need the lights. It's what they call dark factory floor. And so now we can ask, okay, massive loss of jobs in manufacturing, what has been the impact? Kind of, if you ask economists, usually they say, oh, people find other jobs. This is the conventional wisdom. They lose one job, they'll find other jobs, everything works out. And I'm going to show you that this is not so simple. So if you're interested in jobs and GDP, then there are 4 key economic indicators you need to follow. The thing that drive economic growth, 2 things, economic growth for 2 reasons. Either there are more people, immigration, or just reproduction, or productivity growth. So normally productivity growth makes the economy grow, and so GDP is supposed to grow, and that generates more jobs, and also people income goes up. Quality of life goes up. And if you look at the period, the generation of about 40 years after, 30, 40 years after the World War II, everything was humming along. The economy grew, productivity grew, the economy grew, jobs were created, and people were making more and more money. And something happened around 1980, and this number started to diverge, and productivity continued to grow, and GDP continued to grow, but somehow we're not creating as many jobs, and income has flattened. Just to see income has flattened, here is a chart that I gasped when I saw it. And this is real. Real means constant dollars. That's the term real. In constant dollar, adjusted for inflation. Median yearly income for white men with no college degree. This is what we call white working class men. And you can see that over a generation, they've actually lost income. And this is a shocking because this happens just over roughly essentially the past generation. And if you saw some Trump rallies in the United States, then you saw these men waving their fist and they look very angry. And we used to see angry men usually from the Middle East and they would say something like death to America. And now we're seeing in the United States, you can ask, what are they so angry about? And these charts tell you what are they so angry about. They have lost economic ground, and people don't like to lose economic ground. Another way we can look at it is we hear about unemployment, how unemployment is historically low. But unemployment has been changed by politicians to make it actually economically almost meaningless. Because unemployment rate looks at the percentage of people looking for a job and not finding a job. And so, of course, you can make it one way, you can make it lower, but people not looking for a job anymore because they gave up. And so a measure the economists look, which is better, they call it the labor force participation rate, which is how many people are either working or looking for a job. If they're looking for a job, they are in the labor force. And what you see, this focus on men, because the picture for, this goes back to 1960, and the picture for women would be very different because, first of all, they joined the workforce in a massive way. So I'm focusing on men. And it looks at men between 25 and 54. So generally, they're after school and before retirement. And what you see how we had a drop from 97%, because this is what men used to do. Men used to work to provide for their family. And we see a drop to 88% over a period of 55 years. And it gets, however, much sharper when you stratify it by education. And when you look at it by education, you see that people with bachelor degree or more, they lost some ground, but not much. But if you look at people with high school degree or less, you see a much bigger drop-off. So the reality to that in the United States, if you are a working class man, this is again between 25 and 54, with 20%, the people who are not working, it's about 20%. And 20% effective unemployment, that is a shocking number. We think of a country in deep depression when you have 20% unemployment. And this is happening right now in the United States. It doesn't happen in our world. When you look in academia, people are feeling fine. When you go to small town, you go to working class area, you go to suburbs, United States, you find these areas in economic depression. So what's happening? Of course, technology does not kill all jobs. So the best way to see it is to divide the labor force into 3 pieces. And roughly you can think of them skill, you can correlate skill with salary, with income. So there is high skill and middle skill and low skill. And so you can see the pie on the left is 1983, and that you can see there were 50% were low skill, and 26% high skill, and almost 60% middle skill. Now, automation does not affect, so far, low skill jobs. Think of a job of cleaning table in a restaurant. Do we have any roboticists in the room? Nobody knows how to build a robot today to clean tables in a restaurant. Think what is needed in terms of dexterity and agility and situational awareness. And we pay these people so little, it doesn't make any economic sense to try to automate it. We'll just hire someone who's still probably in high school, and they can clean table in a restaurant. At the high-end job, people like us, it's true, we can't automate it yet. So where is the sweet spot for automation? Is what's called middle skill job. If you go to manufacturing jobs, this was in the United States, this was usually union jobs. So these people were making $40,000 to $60,000 a year, and they were doing routine jobs, so they do the same operation again and again and again. This is a sweet spot. They're paid enough, and we know how to automate it. So you can see that the middle skill occupation, they have went from 60% almost to 45%. Massive loss of jobs at the middle skill level. Now, once these people lost their job, what can they do? They can upskill. You can take someone who used to be who is, let's say, a truck driver, and you say, you don't need truck driver anymore, but you can write software for autonomous trucks. You'll find probably a few bright truck drivers that can do the transition, but probably very few. So many of these people, okay, they can go, for example, to retail. Their salaries drop by 50%. This is a big loss for people. Some of these people say, screw it. Excuse me. I'm not going to go for a job anymore. I gave up. So many of these people just gave up, and they have dropped out of the job market.
So it seems that...
Why don't we keep questions to the end?
Sure.
So an impact you can see here, what happened again to income over the past, really, from the 70s. And you have an advanced degree, you have done very well. Again, these are real hourly wages, so this is adjusted for inflation. If you have advanced degree, you've done quite well. If you have a bachelor degree, you have done well. If you have some college, maybe associate degree, it's a 2-year degree, then you kind of roughly kept ground. But if you have high school or less, then you have lost. Again, we have seen that income has actually been dropped for such people. Now, this is all data. It says, I kind of implied that automation caused this, but I show no evidence that automation is causing it. And this was a huge debate over economists. If you went back just 5 years ago, what you find is there was a plurality of economists that accepted that information technology and automation is a major reason for this decline in wages, but the majority of economists were not sure or disagreed. But it has changed over the last few years, partly because there is a more fine granularity data that correlates in urban area what happens when you deploy robots. And you see very clearly the more robots you deploy, the more jobs are lost. In fact, every deployed robot usually goes to lose about 3 jobs are lost, because when a manufacturing worker loses his job, it means that he or she don't have money to spend around, and this causes more loss to the community. So other jobs are lost as a result. And so by 2017, Laura Tyson, who was President Clinton's chief economic advisor, said that among economists, however, the consensus is that about 80% of the loss in US manufacturing jobs over the last 3 decades was the result of labor saving, productivity enhancing technological change, with trade coming a distant second. Now, why instead politicians talk about trade? Because automation is a vague, abstract term, and it's not clear what you can do about it. And when you talk about trade, then you can blame other countries and other people, especially if they look differently than you, it's easier to blame them. Now, some people say, look, we've been automating now since in building machines at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So what has changed? You know, people always adapted. Well, what's changing is part of the picture we are seeing here. You know, we have now machines that are becoming better at a specialized task, and everybody accepts this trend to continue and deepen and broader. And do we, you know, are we always going to be able to compete? The way we competed with machines, when they become faster than us and stronger than us, we say, well, we still have a cognitive advantage. Are you guys getting better and better every year? I'm not getting that much better, that much faster. And in addition, we have to think about the effect. There is now this huge investment we're seeing now in AI, and the news that we're hearing about progress in AI every day now. We have to think about the concept of tipping point. Okay, this is a concept. This is really phase transition. Okay, when you hit water, you can watch and watch and watch, and nothing happens, and suddenly it boils over. And there was a famous book by 15 years ago, Malcolm Gladwell, that popularized the concept of tipping point, when a quantitative change suddenly becomes qualitative change. And if you're an economist, imagine you're an economist in the year 1700, and somebody asks you to predict economic growth in the next 100 years. And you says, well, I have economic data going back to the birth of Jesus Christ, and economic growth was at most 0.1% per year. So that's my prediction. Well, there was a tipping point. It was called Industrial Revolution, and everything changed. Economic growth went from 0.1% per year to 2 or 3% per year, and that makes a tremendous difference when you look at it over time. And there is a beautiful parable due to Wassily Leontief, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, who wrote about, let's imagine 2 horses having conversation in the year 1910. And one horse is heard about the Ford Model T. And this is the Luddite horse, and he's very worried about job for horses. And the other horse is a neoclassical horse, or neoliberal horse. And the other horse says, look, there has always been new job for horses. Technology always destroys jobs for horses, but it creates new jobs. We cannot even imagine what these jobs will be. Well, as it turns out, the equine population of the United States peaked in the year 1915, and today, there are no more jobs for horses. Horses are pets. Glorified pets, but pets nevertheless. There are no jobs for horses. What about the Industrial Revolution? We adapted the Industrial Revolution. Everything worked out. This is an incredibly facile way of looking at history. It took us 200 years to adapt well to the Industrial Revolution, with two communist revolutions in response. Conservative estimate is 100 million people died in these 2 revolutions. And so for us to walk and say, oh, not to worry, everything worked out in 200 years, is incredibly naive and irresponsible. So we went to, in the election of 2016, nobody talked about automation. Now it's 2020, we have at least 2 American candidates that are talking about automation. Blaise was the mayor of New York. He just dropped out of the race, so he's not a candidate anymore. But just before he dropped out, he wrote an op-ed, and he said, as president, I would issue a robotax for corporation displacing human and create a federal agency to oversee automation. So he said, he put it on the map. He dropped out. There's another candidate, Andrew Yang. I don't think he has a real chance of becoming president, but he's still managing to hang on. He's participated in several debates. And he's talking about, he calls it the freedom dividend. This is a form of universal basic income. He said this is the only way we can survive the so-called robot revolution. And the bigger argument is that the way we adapted to automation since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution was by all the time renegotiating the social compact, the set of laws that governs our working life. Things that we now take for granted, everything was a huge fight. The right to strike, the right to unionize. You know, they would send policemen with dogs and clubs and guns if you put a strike. Abolish child labor. Only in the 19th century, in the 20th century United States, 40-hour work week has not budged since 1938. Equal pay for women and minorities, health and safety laws. So now the debate about universal basic income, there are strong support, strong objection, but at least we are starting a serious discussion about how to deal with the robot revolution. Thank you very much. Frank deserves the first question.
I know you're not an economist, so maybe I shouldn't ask, but how specific are some of your data to the US, and how would they generalize?
This is US. This is very US.
So do you know how well they generalize to, say,
yes.
Europe?
So one of the things that is unique about the US was that I would say the US and the UK were the embodiment of what's called the neoliberal economy, starting essentially with Reagan and Thatcher. And the boss said, trust the market will deal with it, okay? Other countries, they have still a capitalist system, but in Europe, the government is much less hesitant to introduce and deal with policies. So when you look at different countries, you can see the same degree of automation, but if there were social policies in place, you see that the impact on worker was less harsh than it is in the United States. So for example, we see today in the United States, I think it's something like 12% of the workforce are in manufacturing, okay? In Germany, it's 25%. But in Germany, it used to be 40%. So there is also a decline, and when you talk to people, German industrialists, they are concerned about it. But there are also differences, for example, that typically a German manufacturing worker is better educated in the United States. For example, they have a whole concept of Fachhochschules. And so they actually, I had discussion with people from BMW, and they say when you have a better trained workforce, the point in which it's worthwhile to automate them is very different. Because what happened with the human-operated factory floor, it is more flexible. You can retool it it's much cheaper to retool it than it is if it's fully automated, but you need better workforce to do it. The US has invested less in training workforce. So the picture is complicated. That's why I wanted to take the US as an example. And the answer is, policy matters a lot.
Yeah, one question. You didn't take into your models the demographic factor, which means aging population, a higher percentage of people over 55, and all the service jobs that have to be input into this to help this much larger part of the population to live after the working period. And this could compensate for what you say.
So you're completely right. And the demographic factor, when people talk today about what are the kind of the big factors that are going to cause dramatic change in society, automation is mentioned as one, and the other one is demographic change. The answer is nobody really knows how it's going to interfere. The US is also aging, but mostly because of immigration, it was aging slower than both Europe and China, for example. China is because of the one-child policy. US because we had a high degree of immigration, and usually it's younger people who immigrate, we see it less. It's less clear what's going to happen. So some people we need very quickly robots to take care of all the older people. But this is a huge challenge to have a robot that can, just imagine what is the challenge of building a robot that can wash an elderly person. Okay, this is the technology, and the human aspect of it is very, very challenging. Other people have argued that what we need to take, all these people lost their job in manufacturing and send them to take care of elderly. But this is a very naive approach that assumes that people are widgets. You can take it out of here and put it there. Take a manufacturing worker, let's say a man who is 55 years old and worked on the line all his life, and you say, now you should go to wash some old man in the nursing home. And for these people, that's not who they are, okay? it's very difficult for them to adapt. And even if they will show up there and apply for a job, it's not clear that they will be hired. Culture and psychology plays a big factor, and you cannot ignore it.
Okay, time for the last question.
Yeah, I think you touched on a very important question now, saying that the difficulty may not be that there is no need for taking care of elderly. Yeah? Why should robots do it? Why should not robots maybe work with steel and people with people? Yeah? And also, I don't know why school classes have to have more than 20 children and why groups in kindergarten are so big. Yeah? And why many people cannot go to work or don't want to have children and don't have, population is diminishing because they cannot solve the job and children problem at the same time. So in my feeling is there are endless needs for people, but you're right, it's the factory worker or the truck driver will not go and take care and wash an elderly lady. But the children of horses are horses, but the children of people are
so I'll give
not horses, they are people. Maybe they can do different things. Yes?
No, they can. And we need to be imaginative. Also, I talked to an outfit that is concerned about the future of work, and they decided that all this conversation happened among academics. Let's go talk to these people. So they have done focus group with manufacturing workers that have lost their jobs. So first they asked them, what do you think about universal basic income? They hated the idea. They said, this is welfare, I don't want welfare, I want a job. Then they asked them, what do you think about going and working in nursing homes? They hated the idea, that's not who I am. But then they asked them, how would you feel about taking care of your own elderly relatives and getting paid by the government? They love the idea, okay? These are their family, they're willing to take care of them, and they will be paid by the government. So if we just, instead of changing the word universal basic income, and find, no, the government is going to pay you to take care of elderly relatives, suddenly it becomes okay with them. So we have to be sensitive to people's sensitivity and find a way to do things in a bit more imaginative way. And then, you know, there are things that we could do. As I said to Frank, policy does matter. Assuming that the labor market will take care of everything is to me, market fundamentalism. Thank you.
Okay.